See you later.
His wife. It said the town has pine. Thank you very much.
It's amazing to me how Missoula always brings forward this level of training. In a community of our size, it's just one of those characteristics about Missoula that makes us unique. And the other thing that makes us unique is, of course, our healthcare community, and that's what our conversation is going to be about today. It's amazing when you look at how healthcare impacts each one of our lives. I'm going to share with you just my Friday of last week. There's a lot of times we walk through the day and we don't think about healthcare because we might not be directly related to it, or we might not be directly working within that environment on a regular basis. But on Friday, I had the pleasure of working within an organization that focuses on wheelchair education for safety and transportation. And who is it sponsored by? But our healthcare community. Then in the afternoon, I got a phone call from my sister, who's an RN. And she was sharing with me some of the things that she's going through and how exciting she was that she was going to be able to move into an educational position within her organization. So once again, impacted by the healthcare community. And then in the afternoon, I had the opportunity to go and visit a friend that was in the hospital over at St. Patrick. And then that evening, my daughter was cheering at Sentinel High School. She's one of the bases, so she's one of those strong, being born, raised Butte, we raise them tough. So she was one of those girls that throws the people in the air, where when she threw them up in the air, came down sideways, ended up dislocating her shoulder. And you would think we went to the ER immediately, but no, she actually just slammed her shoulder up against the wall and popped it back into place. And then we had to convince her that we were going to go to the ER afterwards. So I ended up my day at community. And so in one day, my entire 24 hours was impacted by the healthcare community. And I have to tell you, every single moment of that day, when I was interacting with that community in one capacity, either as a sponsor or as an employer or as a service provider to my family, it was an experience that was worthwhile, and it was an experience that was brought forward with care. And I think that that's what we're going to hear about today, is we're going to hear about the impact that this organizational community has on us, from a social standpoint, from an economic standpoint, of course, from a physical standpoint. To kick things off, I'd like to thank our sponsors. We've got the Missoulian is one of our primary sponsors. We also have First Security Bank, thank you very much, as well as the Hilton Garden Inn. So let's hear it for those folks. And this forum is really brought forward by individuals within our community and organizations that continue to move Missoula forward. So I'd like representatives from these organizations to please stand if you're present. From the Missoula Area Economic Development, from Missoula Convention and Visitors Bureau, and please stay standing. You thought you were going to get away with that. From Missoula Organization of Realtors, the Missoula Building Industry Association, Missoula Area Chamber of Commerce, Missoula Downtown Association, Missoula Business Women's Network, and Missoula Midtown Association. These folks are not only bringing forward this program for us, but they bring forth so much more to our community. I think that we owe them a huge round of applause for everything that they do for us. So we're going to go ahead and kick things off this morning, and we're going to start things off with Larry, and if you'd like to come on up and join me here. We're going to go through his presentation. He's going to share some impacts from an economic standpoint in our marketplace, and then we're going to go ahead and take a short break. And then we will, of course, have Mr. Steve Carlson and Jeff Fee from our hospitals here in Missoula to come forward and bring forth their information. We would like to go ahead and have open discussion at the end of each of their presentations, so we welcome your questions. We would like to go ahead and keep those questions as it's focused towards our economic impact of the region. We understand that there's a tremendous amount happening out there within the healthcare reform, and unless you guys brought a crystal ball, did any of you three bring your crystal ball with you that has the answers to those questions that you've got it? It's in the car. Darn it. Okay. So being that the crystal ball is in the car, we'll probably have to delay some of those questions about healthcare reform and maybe try to keep that focus towards the impact that we have on our economy here locally and within the region. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Larry, and he'll kick things off for us this morning.
Thank you. I also want to thank the various organizations for putting this together. It's really important. I travel around the region and go into a lot of different communities and talk about where we're going economically and what have you. But a big important part of that is the business community and the larger leadership community regularly getting together like this and just looking at parts of our economy and getting more intimate with it, develop a better understanding of it, and in part that will help us get where we want to get going into the future. It's hard to go into the future blind, and healthcare is one of those areas that when you look at a place like Missoula, it's becoming hugely important in terms of how our economy works and how it's going to work in the future. What I want to do is just kind of put some sideboards around this subject area before our hospital heads get up here and talk about what they've been doing and what they may be doing in the future and where they see healthcare going in the Missoula community. First of all, I want to just give a quick update on this economic slowdown. And we had our first business forum in December, and things were looking pretty scary. And then we had our second one in April, and now we're into fall. We've kind of talked about how we expected things to get better going into spring and summer. What I want to do is just kind of show you we are doing better in a lot of ways, but we're still waiting for these jobs. And right now we're kind of into a jobless recovery nationally. And it's the same sort of thing here in Montana. But if you just look at unemployment rates, this is a 12-month period leading up to September of '07. The importance of this is just realizing all of those light-colored areas of the United States have the lowest unemployment rates, and all of the dark ones have the highest unemployment rates, 10% and more in some cases. But when we went into the recession, which started in December of '07, we were in very good shape from an employment standpoint, lowest unemployment rates in our history. And as this has developed, this is then looking out through October of 2008. So here this is almost a full year later. And you can see how the areas are darkening and spreading. What that is as this slowdown occurred, it tended to concentrate where we already had very high levels of unemployment. And if you look at western Montana, you can see that this is just spreading into our area. You can see Missoula County holding up there fairly well initially. This is then through November of '08. This is just a month later, the same information. This is February of '09. This is March. So you can see how this keeps spreading. And then this is June. Not a lot of spread. See, that's stabilization. That's the slowdown in the slowdown. And so you can see that that's what we're hoping for. And then this is through July of. And what happened is we got a slowdown going into spring and early summer. But then as we've proceeded into the summer, unemployment has risen again a little bit more in a few areas. And this is the last one we have. And when you look then at the charts, and the blue line is U.S. Monthly unemployment, the red one is Montana. And Montana is staying well below national unemployment. We might hit those lights a little bit if anybody knows where they are, just over these screens. I don't know if you can find them or not, but anyway. And we're staying well below it, but we're being pulled up by it. We're being pulled up by it. And then this is unadjusted data. So this is adjusted for the seasonality of unemployment on a month-to-month basis over the course of a year. This is putting the seasonality back into that. And again, the national unemployment much, much higher than in Montana. And you can also see in Montana that we have fallen off of the high considerably. Dating back to February, I think we hit that high. And then this is Flathead County. You can see how badly hammered Flathead County was by this slowdown, but look at the recent improvement. So we are improving. Things are getting much better. This is Ravalli County. And see, Ravalli County has always been a wild and woolly place in terms of unemployment. You can see historically how large these swings have been. And this just goes back to 2000, the first month in 2000 through the most current data. And here's Missoula then. And see, Missoula also, in our historical development, has always been a fairly wild economy, a lot of ups and downs. You go back into the 90s and 80s and 70s, we had tremendous swings in unemployment. But you can see how that tightened up as you move closer to where we are today before we got the slowdown. And really what that is growth. And growth just keeps ratcheting down how much unemployment you have out there, and it just keeps tightening up that seasonality. And so that's been a good thing for us. We got down to 2.4% unemployment prior to the slowdown, so we've held up pretty well, and we will continue to do so. Here's the thing about that is, as we go forward, our highest months of seasonal unemployment in Missoula and western Montana in general are January and February. And our months of lowest unemployment are August, September, which means we're now into October, which means unemployment will probably begin to rise again. Now, people shouldn't freak out about that and think that things are falling apart. The reality is we were going to get so far with this turnaround going into summer and fall before we started back into a slowdown, which is seasonal in our own economy here. So that means that a lot of our recovery, beyond what we've already seen, will probably be occurring next spring and early summer. And I really think, depending on what happens nationally and what have you, we'll see a return to normalcy by about midsummer, next summer. And then as we get into next fall, there'll be a little catch-up because we will have went through a year and a half of slower activity, and we'll probably in 2 years be back to about 2.5% unemployment. We're going to be in that mode for quite a while because our economy has grown so fast and it worked itself to this point over an extended period of time. This slowdown won't stay with us very long. This then looks just at the population of Missoula and Ravalli County, and that's overall on the top chart, and then year to year on the bottom chart. Where we had population losses were in the early 80s and very slow growth, and then we had a spurt that then slowed down, and then we've had another recent spurt that'll probably slow down a little bit. This is total personal income growth in Missoula and Ravalli County. This is very strong inflation-adjusted income growth for Missoula. You can see on the top there. But you can also see on the bottom chart for 5-year periods how that overall has begun to slow. So that income growth is very difficult to maintain at those very fast rates for long periods of time. And this is employment growth, and you can see the little dip we had in the 80s. And then ever since then, it's basically been just up and up and up. And you can see what the growth in employment is on a 5-year basis then on those lower charts. So we're in a good economy. It's good, strong growth. A lot of places would love to have this. That's how we got these very low unemployment rates to begin with. This is overall, when you break the personal income base of the area down into major sectors of the economy, and this gets us to where we are today and what we're going to talk about. At the very top of our list today is healthcare. Healthcare is now over $400 million a year industry in terms of just the employment earnings that are plowed into the Missoula area economy on a yearly basis, just coming through healthcare. And you can see how much higher it is than everything else. Well down the list is retail, trade, and all the others. So This isn't the same in every community. Healthcare is a very large industry, but Missoula has emerged as a particularly strong community for healthcare. This is overall employment. If you just tally up all the full and part-time employment in Missoula County, healthcare is second only to retail trade. And again, this is counting all part-time jobs as well. So you can see how strong healthcare is. Employment earnings, employment overall. And then when we look at growth in employment just since 2001, healthcare is well down the list. You can see a lot of other ones are higher than it. But when you look at labor earnings or employment earnings, healthcare is again at the very top of the list, which means it's not only the largest generator of employment earnings in our community, it's growing faster than any others in terms of the amount of labor earnings growth since 2001. And again, this is inflation adjusted. So this is huge. You can imagine being in a community where you don't have a strong healthcare sector because it's become so important. And then when you look across the entire Missoula economy and we look at how these sectors share in overall employment, which is across the top, healthcare is second only to retail trade with 12% of our entire employment base. And then when you look at labor earnings, it's 15% of all of our employment earnings. And you can see how large that is. This is how we kind of measure the dependence of the area economy on one sector or another. And again, you can see healthcare is up there. Getting back to kind of some of the things we've talked about, particularly at the last business forum, what's the framework for community and regional development? We really do need sub-state, city and region-based strategies. Successful economic development has to reflect an area's particular strengths and weaknesses. Every place is different, so really you can't get a strategy from the state or the nation. You've got to get a strategy from yourself, which is another reason why these kind of forums are so important. It's important to have everybody sort of thinking about not only their own businesses and their own careers and occupations, but beyond that, the kind of larger community and where it's going and where it can go. The key foundations for future economic success are really quality infrastructure. Many of our Montana cities are well behind in infrastructure. I moved here from the Midwest, and that's the first thing you notice when you get here is that the infrastructure has been done at a much lower level than a lot of other places. But there's been some catch-up here, and you can see a lot of stimulus money getting spent here more recently. Quality workforce is hugely important, particularly once we work our way back into these 2.5% unemployment rates. At that point, the way in which we're going to grow our economy is not through more workers, but better workers. And as your economy grows and changes, you also have to have a workforce that's able to move with that change. And every business that comes to town, the first thing they're going to look at is the adequacy of your workforce. So workforce is huge, and I see Barry Good sitting over there with the College of Technology. This is one of the centerpieces for community development and future economic improvement. We also have to devise side-by-side strategies for workforce development and business development using clusters. In other words, you can't come in with one-size-fits-all business development and workforce development programs. They have to be customized for particular types of businesses and for particular clusters of businesses that are most important to your economy. Again, leading us into a discussion of healthcare. Healthcare has become one of Missoula's strategic economic clusters. And so as a community and as an area, in order to nurture that cluster, we have to think about it from a business development and a workforce development standpoint in what it's going to need going forward. We also need to chart and assess our progress using peers. Sometimes you can look at your progress by looking at yourself. Most of the time you have to look at your progress by comparing yourself to a lot of other areas. And so I'm going to do some comparisons of Missoula's healthcare sector to other metropolitan areas throughout the United States. One thing I always say to every community, we need a area economic development roundtable. What that means is sort of like what's in this room. You've got 8 business organizations partnering to do these business forums. That's important. That in some ways that becomes a roundtable in and of itself, people talking to each other, working together. Broader leadership needs to be part of that, including elected leadership. But first and foremost, you have to have business people talking to each other, and so if that doesn't happen, your community sort of becomes partitioned off from itself, and that's not the best way to move forward. What are clusters? They're simply geographic concentrations of interrelated companies and institutions of sufficient scale to generate externalities. Healthcare in Missoula, Montana. Clusters are firms and institutions that are located in somewhat close proximity and that have common interests and needs. Once clusters and potential clusters of an area are better understood, strategies can be devised for each that may involve customized workforce development programs, special programs in business finance and capital investment, programs in research and development, and a range of business development initiatives targeted and customized for each cluster. By knowing your clusters, you can better know how to grow your economy. Most communities don't know their clusters. Do you? Do you know your clusters? Most of us don't. And so that's part of a learning process, and it's a continuous learning process because your economy is always changing. But by knowing what your key clusters are, you're much better at doing things like workforce development, business development, all sorts of things. Planning. Ultimately, this stuff also has to factor into community planning. If we look at Missoula's economic subsectors, now this is a hard thing to read. There's a lot of these subsectors or little pieces of our economy. But when you group them into categories, all of those at the top that are in the, I've got 2 years up here. One is 2007 and one is 2001. And we had this at our last business forum, but all of those at the top are professional, technical, and business services of one type or another. That's how big they are. Right under that in the darker blue is some piece of our overall healthcare system. And this is how it's divided up within our industry classifications, but we have ambulatory healthcare. That's healthcare that it doesn't involve the hospitals or hospital stay. Then we have hospitals and nursing care services. I combine those only because I had to within our data. You get some data that's suppressed for proprietary reasons and what have you. By combining those, I can reveal what that number is. And then we have social assistance services that are related to healthcare. They're small, but they're still a piece of our overall healthcare system. So if you look at that ambulatory healthcare, really we've got a bigger healthcare system here that doesn't involve the hospitals, at least wise hospitals stay, but then hospitals are a huge part of it right there with it. And then the rest of these are just other parts of our economy. All those orange ones are traded goods and services. As you work way down the red, that's real estate and construction. Those white ones are transportation. As you work your way down into the black and gray, you work into utilities and manufacturing. And then finally, some of our wood products, agriculture, and what have you, mining are all at the bottom of that. But Missoula is basically a place in which businesses of a large variety can operate to varying degrees of success, and then as individual businesses succeed, it sort of feeds off and benefits other businesses that are related to that. And out of all of this work over time, you build an economy. And this is the growth that we see within these different cluster categories. Again, all of that at the top is professional, technical, business services, but you can see then the growth in healthcare in those dark blue. This is just another way of then grouping all of these into then segments, not sectors, but segments. When we combine all of Missoula's professional, business, and technical services, that's our biggest part of our economy. Healthcare then falls just below that. And again, that's because we've got all of those things at the top that are a little bit bigger overall. Candidates for key economic clusters in Missoula, and we talked about this last time: professional, technical, and business services. This will continue to grow and grow and grow. It's the biggest and fastest growing piece of the Rocky Mountain West economy, which is the fastest growing economy in North America. And it's also very fast growing in western Montana. Healthcare services, adult education services, that's big and will get bigger. Wholesaling, retail, and services trade. In Missoula here, we have a nice situation in that our trade sector is differentiated into three areas, three different kinds of retail and trade areas, in that we have the downtown, the Southgate and Midtown area, and then the Reserve Street. So in a lot of ways, this is a good way to do a retail sector and services sector, in that it's differentiated. And then we have assorted manufacturing. While many long-standing manufacturing industries have seen a lot of decline in the United States, if you look at manufacturing nationwide, there's a lot of small and niche manufacturing that's developing from place to place. And here in Missoula, you'll see some of that as well. Manufacturing here in Missoula has been heavily concentrated historically in wood products, but when you look around, you see a lot of growth in kind of small manufacturing. You see a lot of this in the Bozeman area, for example. Then some other sectors, that little quote at the top from Einstein. We also have a conservation cluster, and it's a big economic engine here in Missoula. The Forest Service, all of the conservation program associated with the University of Montana, Rocky Mountain Elk, Clark Fork, Five Valleys, Boone and Crockett, you name it, it's big. But we don't tend to think of that as an economic cluster, and we need to. And actually, those folks need to figure out how that's going to work for the community going forward. Not just their work, but also how they work for us economically. We also have a growing and will be a large arts and culture cluster here, particularly if you look at something like the downtown plan and the huge plans for the arts district there. That's a huge idea, a big kind of economic investment, but it has an awful lot of promise to build on what we already have. Then also just a recreation and tourism cluster that we have just because of where we are and what we have here. So we have an awful lot of things to work with. We're going to really focus on this healthcare cluster to begin with. Our major hospitals, major providers of healthcare related technical services. When I started doing my work on this, I called up Mary over at the Community Medical Center, and she kind of ran through all the various entities in the Missoula area here, and I got confused in a hurry. There's a lot of them, and it's hard to kind of figure out what all of these are, how they fit together, and how it all works. But out of all of that comes this very large and successful healthcare sector that we have. We also have nursing homes and residential care facilities that over the next 15 years will only double in number and size. And then there's also some social assistance programs that assist in community health that are added into this, but they're kind of a small part of the overall thing. This just looks at, if we date back all the way to the early 70s, how Missoula's healthcare sector looks and has grown. These are inflation-adjusted dollars. And I've taken out the lower chart there is the social assistance part at the top. The other two components are ambulatory healthcare and then hospitals. So you can see how big they are. When you just take those bottom two big slices, that's what I put in that top chart to show you how this thing has grown over time. And then when you look at healthcare across Montana, and you just kind of divide it up by the 56 counties, Billings is by far the largest, over $600 million a year. And I mean, anyone who's been through those medical and healthcare facilities of Billings, that's huge, it's big. 2 large hospitals and on everything else related to that. Missoula is just behind that. Missoula is a much smaller city than Billings, but we have, as you look at in the lower chart, when you compare healthcare labor earnings to our personal income base, you see that Missoula is actually larger than Billings. Now, what we're doing here is we're simply dividing all of the employment earnings that come out of healthcare by our overall personal income base, and then calculating for every $20 million in income, how much healthcare do we have, and you can see that in Missoula there, by '07, it's $2.43 million in healthcare employment earnings for every $20 million in personal income. Now, is that big? Well, it's the biggest in the state. It's bigger than Billings, and it's bigger than Great Falls. Great Falls is quite a ways down behind Missoula. Great Falls, with Benefice Healthcare, has been making huge investments in their healthcare facilities, as you know, over time. Also, Great Falls is known for all the disputes they have within their various healthcare providers. They're kind of a community divided when it comes to healthcare. In a lot of ways, that puts them at somewhat of a competitive disadvantage. But you can look at how these three major providers, Billings, Missoula, and Great Falls, kind of compare. But when we look at Montana and the larger region, these red dots are really where the people are, and you can see as you look at this from the Flathead Valley down through Lake County and into the Missoula Valley and the Bitterroots, you've got a very large population concentration. You can see looking to our west a much bigger one in and around Spokane. Great Falls doesn't have that population base surrounding it that Missoula has, neither does Helena or Butte or Bozeman. And so you have relatively small healthcare systems within those internal communities of Helena, Butte, and Bozeman, and relatively big ones in Missoula, Great Falls, and Billings. So it's kind of a competition that goes on, and certain places emerge as the winners in that, and in the healthcare arena, Missoula's been one of those. This just looks at it back in 1994. I can't believe it's been that long, but I asked the hospitals to give me their inpatient discharges by 5-digit zip code, all of the biggest hospitals in the state, and then I just mapped them. And I did that to try to identify their service areas, but also to kind of identify the regional market areas of these these major cities in Montana. But Billings is all of these blue dots, and then you get the Kalispell Medical Center and all those red dots up there. The Missoula hospitals are the green ones, and so you extend down into the Bitterroot Valley and then up and around. You can see Helena is a wedged-in market area, same with the Butte and then also Bozeman. This is then looking just at the service area of the Western Montana Clinic, and you can see it goes all the way down to Salmon. It even extends over, there's some in Boise and Spokane and up into the Flathead area. It's big, and this really in a lot of ways tells you how far the various specialists and physicians that operate through the Western Montana Clinic, how big their market area is. But we also have a lot of service arrangements with surrounding communities and hospitals and clinics within those communities. This looks at Superior, Plains, Ronan, Polson, Hamilton, and just looks at then from a 5-digit zip code where their customers are. So really there's kind of a complex here, and out of all of this you get this very large healthcare sector here in Missoula. When we look at all the metropolitan and micropolitan areas in the U.S., now what this is all of the green areas are MSAs, Metropolitan Statistical Areas. These are our urban places, and they're identified using county lines. Missoula County, Yellowstone County, and Cascade are all MSAs. Montana only has 3 MSAs. The brown ones are what's called micropolitan statistical areas. They're smaller urban places, not metropolitan in size, but I just want you to see how that looks. Before then I look at how healthcare relates to these different areas. What I did was I simply pulled up the healthcare numbers for the 366 metropolitan statistical areas nationwide. And then I compared healthcare in those places to the personal income bases of those places to gauge how important healthcare was from one place to the next. And here's what you get, is all of the white areas, healthcare is less than $2 million for every $20 million in personal income. All of the light blue, it's 2 to 2.25 million. That medium blue, which is where Missoula is 2.25 to 3.20. Remember, Missoula's was 2.43. So what I'm doing is relating this to the country. Then we have only one area, one single metropolitan statistical area that's greater, that healthcare is greater than 7 million in labor earnings for every 20 million in personal income. And which area is that? It's Rochester, Minnesota. It's the home of the Mayo Clinic. So when you start looking at all of this, first of all, we know where Rochester is, but all those other dark blue places have the most specialized healthcare systems. They have the highest dependencies on healthcare of any MSAs in the United States. So we're there. Now, how often do we talk about healthcare when we talk about community and economic development? It's a hard area to move into, and we've got a lot of professional people that are doing that, who run these places, but it is a hugely important thing to the community as a whole. And this just takes all of those places and then puts them on a chart. So if you put them on a chart from biggest to smallest, and keep in mind there's 366 of these are just the top, I don't know how many I've got up there, maybe 25 or 30. Missoula is 22nd among all MSAs in terms of our healthcare dependency, measured in this way. You can see how big Rochester is with Mayo. It's quite amazing how a relatively small place like that simply became all about healthcare, and it's been that way for a very long time. But in some ways you could see a place like Missoula, Montana over time continuing to emerge as a even more important healthcare provider and center. You can see Billings shows up in this as well, okay, and where we rate. This is when you then look at just MSAs of under 160,000 people. So when you take out the real big ones and you just work with all of the MSAs under 160,000, Missoula's 11th. So it's a big deal. And then if I just, and you can see also Billings and Great Falls emerge in this, of the under 160,000. I then just focused in on the western United States. I basically, Montana, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, down into Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, the two Dakotas. I think I also went into New Mexico, Arizona. And then I compared all of those western MSAs under 160,000, and here's the list. So once you pull down on the interior west, up and down the Rockies, only places of 160,000 and less, we are the most dependent on health care of any of them. And again, it's kind of one of those things that flies a little bit under the radar screen, but not only is it large, but hopefully after we get done listening to the next two speakers, we'll find out it's going to get considerably bigger as we go forward. One of the reasons why it's going to get so big is because of our shifting age demographics. And everybody knows, it's ever heard me talk, I always have to talk about aging, because it's, out of all the things we're going to be dealing with going forward, it's big, it's huge. And particularly when we get into this healthcare area. And I just finished doing a study for the Missoula school system looking at future enrollment levels for the various levels of our school system, elementary, middle school, high school, and what have you. And if you look at Montana's population, just quickly, this is comparing our 1990 population to our population in 2000, just counting the population by single age from youngest to oldest. And wherever those red bars are above the blue bars, we added population. That's shown in the lower chart. So during the 90s, and if you look at the age of that big bubble, it's people in their 40s and 50s, and that's boomers. And then we actually lost people just behind them in their 30s and 20s. We added people just behind that, which is Echo. That's the kids of the boomers. And then we have another hole behind the kids of the boomers, and that's how we closed elementary schools. Okay? This is then 90 to 2000 compared to 2000 to 2010. So now that big growth in 40 and 50-year-olds is now growth in 50 and 60-year-olds. Everything is shifting to the right as you go into the future. And the echo that was back in high school years and early 20s is now moved into mid-20s to early 30s. That's why we're in such a hugely important period right now, because we're now deciding how many of the kids of the boomers stay. And look at how that echo bubble looks going out to 2010 compared to the one for from 1990 to 2000. See, it's a lot smaller. See, that's the leakage or the loss of young adults that's going on in Montana. It's part of our history. Something you really can't afford if you're going to look at replacing these aging boomers as they leave the workforce. It's a big deal. But behind that echo group is now emerging echo. And so echo, and again, this is statewide, that's now going to feed back into our school systems. And that's going to replenish the pipeline going into our elementary schools, and it's already happening. This is then taking this out to from 2010 to 2030. So we go this. Now as these boomers move steadily into retirement, big hole right behind them. So we've got all the remaining kids of the boomers to try to replace them, which they can't do. We've got a big hole behind them, and then we've got echo, which is the kids that they're having. And if you go to Missoula Farmers Market to see all these buggies, baby buggies and babies, that's what they are. And this is how it looks when you sort of look at from 2004 to 2030. This is hard to get your head around, but it's important. And this is just looking at the under 18 in blue versus 65 and older in that orange or gold color. And then the lower charts translate that on a decade by decade basis. Where are we going? Where are we seeing growth statewide in our population? We saw a lot of growth in that green bar, which is the older adults that are pre-60s, in the 90s and currently, but next decade it's going to be primarily 65 and older. Okay, so what does that mean for healthcare? It means a lot. You can also see statewide there's a lot of decline in their younger age categories, and that's going to mean a lot of schools aren't going to be around, and it's going to be a lot of places are going to lose population in this state. This is how that aging is going on. That's 65 and older as a share of the population from 1980 to 1990 to 2005. So as those counties turn black and they go from green to black, they go from less than 10% 65 and older to more than 20% 65 and older. And statewide in Montana by about 2025, we'll have about 26% of our total population 65 and older. However, it'll differentiate itself across the state. There'll only be a handful of young counties, and about 2/3 of our counties will be very, very old. This is, if I were to ask you, don't look at this, what was the highest year for births in the state of Montana? Our population has been steadily growing over time, but what was our single highest year for births in our history? It was back in 1955. And so as you look from coming out of World War II, and these are the actual numbers from the vital statistics, we hit our birth peak in 55. What's that? That's boomers. That's that big bubble, okay? Then it fell off, and that's that hole after the boomers. Then we see another bubble, that's their kids. And then it falls off again, and then we see another bubble, and that's echo. And this is taking us from 45 to 2008. And then the lower line is deaths. Aging population, that number of deaths just keeps going up, and actually in another 5 years that death curve will bend up. You'll just need to follow the bubble along, but you'll see an accelerating growth in deaths. And now the issue is, how big is echo-echo? Now these are the statewide numbers, and it looks like echo-echo maybe happened 2 years ago. In other words, we may already be through it. Here's what the Census Bureau projects in terms of births statewide in Montana. So I put the actual births and then those little dots out to the end, out through 20, whatever it is. That's Census Bureau projections for Montana. Now what they see is births peaking out in about 2010. But again, you can see the actual numbers, which are much higher than Census Bureau projected. Now why are our births much higher than Census Bureau projected? Census Bureau didn't think we would hang on to as many young adults as we did. So even while we're losing young adults, Census Bureau expected us, and they did these back in 2005, going forward to have much fewer young adults than what we do have, and a much lower number of births. So we have this little burst here that's higher than projected, but it looks like it could be over sooner than projected. So that's the other part of it here. So we'll just keep following this going forward. But here's how it breaks down. Western Montana, if we just take the counties west of the mountains, including Missoula County, and just look since the late 70s, those are birth deaths at the top. And then this is the Eastern Plains region of Montana, births deaths. See how different they are? And what you find is then you take the Montana vital statistics numbers on births on an annual basis. What you find is that 5 counties in Montana are basically accounting for almost all of our echo-echo. And that's that top blue line. Are you following me with all this? That's the uptick in births that's been going on for, it's been about 10 years or so there in that blue line. And there's 5 regional center counties that are growing that account for all of that. And then Cascade and Silver Bow are broke out separately in that yellow color. I've got the rest of the state there. I'm having trouble seeing the chart here, but what you find is that the only places where we've got more births are the only places where we've got more young adults. And the rest of the state doesn't have it. And these are the 5. It's Yellowstone, Missoula, Flathead, Gallatin, Lewis and Clark. Yellowstone's doing pretty well, been rising along. You know, you could go into Billings area and it's a rapidly aging community, but they have a fast-growing economy, and it's opened the door for a lot of young adults. And so they've stuck, and in the process you can see this reflected in birth rates. In Missoula here you can see that we actually hit a high in 2007 and then fell back in 2008. But the reality is our birth increase will probably, leastwise in Missoula and Yellowstone, these 5 places, continue on through about 2009, 2010. So we got a couple of more years in front of us on that. Here, again, this is Missoula County, births, deaths. Now this is a complicated one. These are actual numbers. Now, why is this important? Because although our population is kind of growing steadily now, it's not growing steadily by age group. And just like you see all of these bubbles in births and in where the boomer population is and echo and what have you, as you follow these different age groups through time, this is going back to 1970 through 2008, that very top line is persons in their early 20s. And these are just 5-year age groupings. I think they're 5, or are they 10? 10-year age groupings. 10-year age groupings from youngest to oldest. And I'm going to break these out separately, but this is Missoula County's age demographics, historical. And that green line going up and down and up is really tracing through what's happening with births and then how they ultimately translate into young adults. That green line, the blue lines are then our school-age population. And you can see it's much flatter. And then when you work your way through the red and into the orange and gold, those are our older populations. This is then projected through 2030. So we take this historical and project it through 2030. This is the shifting age demographics of Missoula County over the next 20 years. Okay? Here's what it translates into in terms of our overall population. So this translates into this, and then our growth over time will slow. So annual growth in the 90s, current decade, and then the 2 decades in front of us will slow. Why is it slowing? Because it's aging. And birth rates will fall off as death rates rise, and our entire growth will depend on what happens with regard to net migration. This is then looking at the young adult population of Missoula County. So this top one is our persons in their 20s, 20 to 24 and 25 to 29. The bottom one is in their 30s. Now, if we take these numbers and we look nationwide and we simply ask the computer how many places actually had an increase in their young adult populations, they're all shown in green, and how many had a decrease in their young adult population, they're all shown in gray. Now look at Montana. During the entire decade of the 90s, when we had all of these folks moving into Montana, we only had 4 counties that actually added to their population 25 to 39. And then this is since 2000. So look at Missoula here. And why do we have so many babies? Because we have more young adults. Why does the rest of the state not have more babies? Because they don't have young adults. That's why, all of this stuff fits together, and we can take it forward and we can understand what it's going to look like. Then we ask the computer, okay, take all these green places and rank order them in terms of how many of them have at least 100 more young adults over those period, and then how many had at least a 12% or more or a 6% or more increase. Those are the darkest green areas, and Missoula is one of them. So we've been fortunate. So in other words, in this great demographic shift that went on where we're disproportionately adding to our older population, Missoula surfaced as one of those places where young people like to be. And they've hung in there more, but we only have, at this last chart here, we've got 4 or 5 counties statewide that are in this. That's why the rest of the state, for the next 20 years, you're going to basically hear the rest of the state talking about what are they going to do with their schools. And what are they going to do with their declining population and tax bases and everything else? And then you're going to have a small number of places where you've got growth. Here's what births look like in Missoula County. Now, the blue line, dark blue, is actual. And then what I did was, based on this trend over time, I projected that forward to 2030 in that blue line, but then I developed it's a regression equation, a statistical thing, whereby births are a function of how many people you've got in their early 20s, late 20s, early 30s, late 30s. That's that red line. And then I projected that forward. So births in Missoula County will peak in about 2010, 2011, based on the number of young adults we have built into our population profile right now. Then fall off and go forward. You see that? This will translate into our under 10 population, and then our 10 to 19 population will get a rebuilding of our school enrollment. We've had about a 15-year decline in elementary and middle school enrollment, and that's now settling into our high schools for about the last 6 or 7 years, but they now will recover over the course of the next 15 years. And you actually get this. These are where's Brent Campbell? Where's he at? Those are the actual numbers we end up with looking at school enrollment within just the Missoula Public School District for our elementary schools in blue, our middle schools in orange, and then our high schools in green. So essentially, after rising and falling, they'll rise again. But so all of this is sort of, you got to stay on top of it. Nothing's linear. Everything is curvilinear, which makes it a complicated world. But if you follow it along, you can sort of understanding it. And it translates directly into things like housing and businesses and healthcare. Here's then our 40 and 50-year-old populations for Missoula County. So going forward, you've got the same sort of things, but these are building considerably. Here's our 50s and 60-year-old, or 60s and 70-year-old. See how rapidly those begin to rise and when that occurs? So over the next decade and into the one after that, we're going to see very, very, very fast increase in our 60 and 70-year-olds. And then this is 80-year-olds. It's pushed out a little bit further because that's pushed out where boomers actually reach their 80s and older. But nevertheless, now the question is, how does this translate into health care? A lot of health care. As a matter of fact, if we could go forward to about 2022, 23, I would venture to say that our health care sector in Missoula will be twice the size it is now. It's quite astounding, and that's because, if you look at healthcare and its increase as people hit their 60s, it rises very fast. So we're on a very fast curve here. I'm going to jump to the end, and then we'll have our hospital folks. So this is Missoula's emerging healthcare cluster. There's a lot of things wrapped up in it. It's big. It accounts for 15% of our employment earnings, 3 times what we get out of manufacturing. If you go back 20 years, manufacturing was 18% of our employment earnings. Now it's 5%, and healthcare is now 15%. So this is the kind of dramatic change that's gone on here. We're lucky to be in a community and in a place where healthcare has decided to settle into and grow because it's so important, and in so many ways it's becoming a growing economic asset for our community. And where it goes in the future is a big part of that. And so at that point I'm finished, and I can take a few questions, but we'll have time for questions at the end. And I also think that Colleen's going to tell you we'll take a short break here, but make sure you don't leave, because we want to know where this is going to go in the future. And that's what we're about to learn, I hope.
All right, thank you, Larry. It's interesting when we start looking at the economic statistics and how that all folds into our healthcare community. One thing that I would like to do before we take a break, we are going to take a quick break, reconvene at about 9:30. But before we get up and start moving, I'd like for you to have a short table discussion. If you're at a table where you just have 1 or 2 individuals, please join one of the other tables for just a few moments. Talk between the individuals at the table as it relates to how healthcare impacts your organization. Based upon the information that Larry shared with us this morning, it's important for us to apply what we're learning here today to not only our community but also to our organizations. So I'd like for you to go ahead and just have a real brief discussion about how this information from a aging population standpoint and from a healthcare standpoint, how it impacts your organization now. And then at the end of our session, we're going to talk a little bit about how it impacts our community and the sort of things that we need to be doing as a community to kind of drive forward. So we'll reconvene at about 9:30. Please start off with that discussion, and we'll start things back up. Thank you. I'm going to introduce our next 2 presenters, and then we'll go ahead and have them transition between each other. I'd first like to introduce Jeff Fee. If you'd please stand. There he is, Jeff V. Jeff has been the president and CEO of St. Patrick Hospital and Health Science Center since August of 2006. He has 14 years of experience in the healthcare industry, starting off with the Hospital Corporation of America. He is also the former president and CEO at Park Ridge Medical Center in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he was responsible for the strategic planning and the operations for a 527-bed facility. He had 3 campuses on that facility that he was also responsible for, so he's got a tremendous amount of experience in relationship to strategic planning, as well as how to coordinate and get everyone working together towards the same direction and the same goal. As a certified public accountant, recovering. I was just going to ask that question. So he admits. Let's all say hi, Jeff. So as a certified public accountant, sorry, Jim. What can you do? We love you, man. We love you. He began his career actually as a staff auditor with Ernst & Young, and then went on to work as a senior auditor at the Hospital Corporation of America, thank you, before he became a controller within that organization itself, and then moving into the chief operating roles. He has a bachelor's degree in accounting and a master's degree in administration from Belmont University in Nashville, and he and his wife, Kim, live here in Missoula with their 10-year-old daughter, Julian. So thank you for being here. Our second presenter this morning is going to be Mr. Steve Carlson. Please. Steve joined Community Medical Center as president and CEO in February of 2007. He came to Community Medical Center from Arizona, where he was the president at Flagstaff Medical Center. Boy, a lot of football in your background. Chattanooga, Flagstaff, go Grizz. So how does that feel? Good. All right. We'll keep you. He was involved with administrative work with the hospital systems, primarily in Fargo as well as Salt Lake City. He has an undergraduate degree from Salt Lake City, from St. John's University, and a master's degree in hospital administration from the University of Minnesota. His key accomplishments, once again, were focusing in the area of results-oriented performance and quality improvement, patient and employee satisfaction, physician partnering, program development, and financial performance. So both of these gentlemen have a lot of experience that they can share, not only as it relates to their organizations, but also probably some lessons that we can take into our own organizations as well. Steve and his wife have a daughter attending Carroll College in Helena, and my son is over at MSU, and we were sharing stories beforehand, and I have to admit, I've only seen my son once, and you've seen your daughter how many times? 3 times. So we were comparing notes as far as how each one of us is doing with this whole college transitioning process. And he also has a son at Loyola Sacred Heart. So we'll go ahead and kick things off with you, Jeff, if you'd like to share your story. We appreciate that, and then I'll have you transition that directly over to Steve. Thank you, gentlemen.
So when we were putting the presentation together last week, I can certainly give you a qualification. My slides aren't going to be nearly as sophisticated as Mr. Swanson's. I think really what I would like to try to accomplish from my perspective is to give you an overview of the role of what we have to offer at St. Pat's, the role that we play in Western Montana. And while we are staying away from the healthcare reform debate, I will probably interject a few things that we struggle with as it relates to our current economic model that really call out the need for meaningful healthcare reform. Because right now, with everything that's going on within healthcare, we can't really stay away from some of those topics because they are so germane to some of the issues that we're dealing with as an industry. First, before I actually get into the slide deck, I want to give you a little bit of perspective of who we are as it relates to our larger system. St. Patrick Hospital and Health Sciences Center is part of the Western Montana service area for Providence Health and Services. Providence Health and Services is headquartered in Seattle. We're the 6th largest Catholic healthcare institution or healthcare system in the U.S., actually one of the top performing systems in the U.S., been able to maintain our AA bond rating in the very tumultuous times that we're currently in, and having a strong system backing you certainly has its significant advantages, and it certainly helped us weather the storm that we felt certainly over the past year. The Western Montana service area, I play two roles. I'm the president of the hospital, but I'm also the chief executive of the service area, and we have three distinct operating divisions within the service area. We have St. Patrick, we have St. Joe's, and we have the newly formed Ambulatory Services Division, formerly known as our Physician Services Division. We currently employ over 105 physicians in Western Montana, and we actually, to Larry's point earlier, as it relates to ambulatory revenues, we're actually anticipating by 2016 that our ambulatory revenues will eclipse our inpatient revenues, which is a very significant transition for us in terms of how we view our service area, because we are more than just a hospital. We have the bits and pieces, and we're certainly pulling together the components of a larger healthcare system. Another thing that I was talking when we were talking at the break a few minutes ago about, what makes Missoula different and why is healthcare such a big component. I've been working with a company out of Greenville, South Carolina for a number of years, and they help us do facility planning, and they look at demographic trends, they look at use rates, they look at really what programs hospitals should be developing as their demographic ages and their demographic grows. And collectively, between these two consultants, over the span of their careers, they've been in over 4,000 hospitals across the U.S. And every hospital that you go into and every health system that you go into will tell you that they're different. In a lot of respects they are, but in most respects they're the same. They're dealing with the same issues. They said in their career they've run across three that are different, truly different, and Missoula was one of them. And I said, really, what sets us apart? And he says, Jeff, you have the services in Missoula of most 800-bed hospitals. You just don't have the population to support 800 beds. The sophistication and the level of service that you provide is truly unique, because you normally don't find the level of service and sophistication in terms of the health care provided in communities the size that we certainly serve. And that really is very, very remarkable from our perspective. There's a lot of things that play into that. I'm not going to go into it, but I do think that we are unique, and we are very fortunate to have that level of sophistication for the communities and the size of the communities we serve. But on a philosophical note, and it's kind of where I'm getting into the healthcare reform debate, I don't necessarily know or believe that that it's a good thing that healthcare is a #1 industry in Missoula County. It's certainly good today, but I don't think that's certainly where we want to be 20 years down the road. And as it relates to healthcare, I mean, I do think that there's the concept that the more wealthy nations are inherently going to spend more money on healthcare is something that's a natural progression of a society. But I do think that if we're going to become and stay competitive on the global scene as China, India, and other these emerging markets continue to take more of a dominant position in the world economy, that we really need to figure out a way as an industry to support other industries so that we can be more competitive on the global scene rather than it being a driving force of our economy. Because it's way too internal, and we need to be focused externally if we intend on maintaining our presence as a global economic superpower. There, off my soapbox, thank you very much. But I had one other comment that I want to get into as it relates to market share dynamics in Western Montana that's not included in the slide deck. If you remember the slide and the catchment areas that Larry showed that showed the catchment area for the different health systems in Montana, and Steve and I have talked a lot about this as it relates to figuring out how we can continue to reinforce Missoula as the premier tertiary referral resource center for Western Montana. Billings has a huge catchment area, and that comes from its history as being a tertiary referral center for the eastern portion of the state and even portions of the western Montana. One of the things that's very different in Western Montana than it is in Eastern Montana is the concentration of hospitals and critical access hospitals, specifically in our respective primary service areas. And one of the dynamics that's playing out right now as we speak that has a significant impact on economic development and actually has an impact on our hospitals and healthcare systems in Missoula is the number of critical access hospitals that we have surrounding Missoula County. We have a very high concentration of these hospitals. We own one of them up in Polson, and every single one of these hospitals are doing everything they can to keep more and more of those patients locally. We currently, at St. Pat's, 50% of our admissions come from outside of Missoula County. 50%. And as they're more and more successful at keeping cardiology, orthopedics, general surgery local, that's going to put downward pressure on the type of business that's coming into Missoula, and it has an impact on our overall economy here as well, because when these people come in, for health care, they're typically, especially depending upon the amount of time that they're traveling and if it's an inpatient stay, it does translate into ancillary services being consumed by or being provided by our community in the form of lodging, meals, and certainly other things that the families do when they come to Missoula. So that's a dynamic and it's a balancing act that Steve and I constantly have to work with, because we do rely on these institutions for tertiary referrals, but at the same time we are seeing increasing competition coming from that sector. So a little context in terms of some of the things that we're dealing with, and I'll probably hit on a couple of these in just a minute again. So St. Pat's, we've been here since 1873, 16 years before Montana became a state. We were founded by the Sisters of Providence, as we mentioned earlier, part of Providence Health and Services. And it is interesting to know that St. Pat's is the oldest continuing operating ministry within Providence Health and Services, going back now 136 years. Today we're a 247 licensed bed multi-specialty facility serving 7 primary counties, with a referral center for our tertiary services of 17 counties. It encompasses over 60% of the population of the state of Montana. We have certain services that have been recognized, as does Community Medical Center, by Health Grades and CMS. So again, the quality of care that we're providing here is great, and as we've already discussed, currently St. Pat's is the second largest employer in the city. We've been very fortunate, International Heart Institute, and this is something, I'm not up here, and I hope Steve certainly takes this way as well, and I hope he has an opportunity to do the same, is I'm not up here trying to toot my horn. What I'm up here and trying to do is articulate to people, to you, some of the key services that we do provide, because I think it's important. When I talk to people, when I run into people, when we do consumer perception surveys, we did a consumer perception survey right when I got here, and 60% of the respondents didn't know St. Pat's did brain surgery. Well, I mean, that's one of our key service lines. And so when we're out talking about the services we're providing, I'm not up here trying to position myself with community, because Steve and I have a good working relationship. I'm really kind of going through this. So I'm just giving you a little qualifier as to what we're doing here, not trying to toot our own horn, but again, just to try to articulate the services that we do provide. The International Heart Institute, we are very fortunate. We have some truly world-class physicians that work in the International Heart Institute, and we've been recognized in the top 5% of cardiac programs across the country. We have Western Montana's only Level 2 trauma center, and this is a significant safety net for the communities in which we serve because of the infrastructure that we have to have in place in order to maintain that trauma designation. We have a comprehensive cancer program. We have what was recently regarded and recognized as an Outstanding Achievement Award by the Commission on Cancer. We have a chronic disease prevention and management program that was recently given the President's Award within Providence Health and Services for really changing the way we're managing certain diseases. We have one of only 3 certified air flight programs in Montana with fixed and rotor wing aircraft, which provides obviously very important air transport services either into the community or external to the community if it's something that we can't handle. We have comprehensive neurosurgical, stroke, and orthopedic programs. We have a bariatric surgery program. We have a 24/7 intensivist program in our critical care unit, which means that we have intensive care or critical care trained physicians that actually are physically located within the critical care department, which significantly enhances the nature of the care that we're providing. We currently have 279 physicians on staff, 105 employed physicians, as I mentioned earlier, and most recently we introduced the Da Vinci robot, which provides a minimally invasive approach to certain types of services, certain types of surgery. GYN and neurology has been out there for some time now. We are a center and have been known literally worldwide for our work with Dr. Carlos Duran, who was one of the pioneers with mitral valve surgery. Historically, even with mitral valve surgery, you have to do a sternotomy, which means you're having to crack the chest. We are now performing with select patients mitral valve surgery with the robot, which means you literally have 4 incisions through the rib cage. And when you think about the recovery time, the amount of blood that is saved in those processes, it really does represent a significant advancement in the sophistication of care and the quality of care that we're providing for those patients. We most recently opened up our new emergency department. I think 49% of our admissions come through the emergency department. We have, again, like I mentioned, we're a Level 2 trauma center. Our old emergency department was actually built to serve 10,000 patients per year. Right when we started building the new one, we were operating well over 24,000 patients a year, and we're anticipating that by 2017 that we're going to be seeing more than 33,000 patients a year. And one of the things that we are very fortunate in this community is that we do have a number of urgent care clinics in the area, and we're not seeing a lot of the low acuity stuff coming through our emergency department. I can't speak for community medical center, but we have an above average acuity in terms of the complexity of the patient we're seeing, and we're actually admitting 1 out of every 5 patients that come in through the emergency department, where the national average is anywhere between 10 and 15%. So that, again, that does reflect the fact that we are a regional referral center, and the complexity of the patients that we are seeing continues to increase. So we literally had to build this emergency department in and around our existing emergency department. As it relates to economic development, this was a $15 million project. We used local trades and local contractors. Got a plug in for Gordon Construction, who did a fantastic job on this particular project. But again, this is not a small project. I know Steve's got some additional projects on his plate as well. But this again represents a pretty significant investment in the infrastructure for care for Western Montana. As it relates to the economic impact, for St. Pat's, just some statistics. As you can see, St. Pat's, we currently have 1,287 FTEs, and that's a head count when you include all of our part-time people, and PRN is right around 1,650. St. Joe's up in Polson, you can see those numbers. Volunteer hours, we had roughly 34,000 volunteer hours last year, which equates to roughly 17 FTEs, which is a pretty significant investment for that volunteer community. Payroll going into the economy, a little over $61 million. This is for St. Pat's and St. Joe's as well. And if you can see the tax benefit both respective organizations had in 2008 at $2.4 and $278,000 respectively. This one is a little bit more down to earth and practical, because this is where I think you see some of the tangible results of some of the work that both of us do, just as it relates to the nature of the work that we're doing, and that's physician recruiting. In 2007, we recruited 18. In 2008, we recruited 26, and in 2011, year to date, we've recruited 11. That's a significant number of people and families that are coming into this community that have good paying jobs. These are well above average in terms of the overall income levels, and you can see that the average home price for this demographic is anywhere between $450,000 to $500,000, and you can see that the 2009 for our physician services division, 105, that the total physician salaries are right at $14.4 million. And these people, when they come to town, they're doing their shopping here, they're buying cars here, and they do significantly add to the economy of our community. In 2008, we're projecting for 2009 net operating revenues. This is actually cash flow into the hospital of $258 million. Operating expenses of $246 million, and we typically reinvest out of those monies anywhere between $10 and $25 million a year. That number could get significantly larger if, in the event, at some point in time, we're going to have to replace our bed tower. And that's a well over $100 million project. So it really depends upon the nature of the project and the size of the project, but from a routine reinvestment into this community, from a capital perspective, we're typically plowing $10 to $25 million back a year. Talked about this a little bit earlier, St. Pat's from an inpatient discharges perspective. Our primary service area is Missoula and the 6 surrounding counties, and we get roughly 82% of our admissions from that catchment area. I mentioned earlier that over 50% of the discharges that we currently receive come from outside of Missoula County, again highlighting our regional position. Out of state, roughly almost 5% of our admissions come from out of state. We have a pretty significant catchment area in northern Idaho. And again, when those people come into Missoula, they're typically coming in with family and having to stay at least 1 or 2 nights in the city. Our tertiary service area, as I mentioned earlier, covers over 60% of the population of the state, and we get roughly a little over 9% of our admissions from there, and other portions of the state, roughly 3.2. And our average length of stay is 5 days, and so when you start thinking about these out of area patients coming in when they come in with their family, and with an average length of stay of 5 days, that does have an ancillary impact on some of the area businesses as well. We currently, because of the nature of what we do, we currently provide outreach clinics. Actually, we do have flat-out clinics in Butte, Kalispell, Helena, Anaconda, and Deer Lodge. We're currently providing invasive and outpatient cardiac services in Butte. We do interventional cardiology services in Helena. We're currently providing the open heart program in Kalispell. And we have physicians that are going and doing clinic in Anaconda and Deer Lodge. And Hamilton is another one of the areas where our cardiologists are going. We have primary care clinics in Sealy, Polson, Florence, Stevensville, Lolo, and Frenchtown. And then we have rural outreach to our EDs, and these are the areas and the communities in which we have physicians and mid-levels that are going out and providing coverage in these emergency departments. And this does a couple things. Number one, it enhances their coverage capabilities. It raises the quality of care that's being provided in those emergency departments. And selfishly, when you have an aligned physician and a patient needs to be referred out of that community, having those guys out there, those physicians out there, certainly those patients are coming into Missoula, which is good for all of us. I'm going to spend just a minute talking about community benefits simply because it's received a lot of attention at the state level with the Attorney General commissioning a study to make sure that the not-for-profit healthcare systems in the state were doing their part relative to their tax benefit that they would receive if they were for-profit. And community benefit is legally defined in the three areas as I'm going to talk about just very briefly, and that's charity care, government-sponsored health care, and community benefit services. Charity care is once you set your policy, and our policy is at 400% of poverty level. That way, if a family of four coming in, you're 400% of poverty, you qualify for some level of charity care. And once you set that policy level, you really don't control the actual dollar amounts you're spending because as the patients present, they're going to either qualify or they don't qualify. The government-sponsored health care, and this is the actual unfunded cost between what the government pays us and what it costs to provide care. Specifically, Medicaid is not designed to cover the cost of care, and so the difference between what it costs and what we get paid, we get to capture as charity care. And lastly, community benefit services. These are elective programs that we put in place to meet a community need. In 2006, you can see we ran roughly $14.5 million in community benefit, and that grew through 2008 to a little over $21.5 million. So that's a roughly over $3 million increase per year, which from our perspective is at a somewhat of an unsustainable rate. But when you break it down into the respective areas, you can see in 2007 to 2008, charity care went from 6.7 to 6.2. We actually saw a slight decline in charity care. Which we still have yet to been able to figure out how that happened. 2007, 2008, we saw it went from 4.6 million government-sponsored health care to 5.4, and then community benefit services went from 5.7 to a little over 8. And again, these are the elective programs we have in place: mental health, our Life Flight program, our Level 2 Trauma Center. These are all programs that operate in the red that play a significant role in the healthcare safety net for Western Montana that we keep in place that ultimately we do get to capture as a community benefit. Again, speaking to the demographic, and like I said, this slide is a little bit less sophisticated than some of Larry's, as we recently talked about, but it does it tells a consistent story. When you look at our primary service area, this is a projected 5-year growth rate, and the numbers probably are a little different than Larry's because our data set comes from a different source. You can see that our primary service area is growing right along with the national average, 4.5%, USA 4.6. When you look at women in the childbearing age, 18 to 44 population, our primary service area, this is over 5 years, flat, which is pretty consistent with Larry's observations around births and projected births. When I got here, there was a significant sentiment in the community that the two hospitals were in too much of a competitive mode. The community wanted to see more collaboration. And when you look at that number by itself, we were in the process of building an OB unit, and we decided to put a stop to it when just looking at that one number, because that really does represent nothing more than a pure competitive play. And there is the type of competition in healthcare to where if you spread volume, certainly the highly specialized volume too thin, you can actually dilute the quality of the program and the quality of the services that are being provided. And we really felt like at that time that it was in the community's best interest that we back off on that particular program. So we went ahead and built the unit out because it was going to be cheaper to build it. So we have a very, very the most expensive storage unit in the state of Montana for a long period of time. Now it's a women's care center. And I'll say this, because Steve and I kid about this, if you see us getting back into the baby business, you know the gloves have come off between the two of us. So hopefully that's not going to happen. But one of the things that we also see, and it does correspond again with Larry's data, if you look at our primary service area, our 65-plus patient population is growing at a clip roughly 5% faster than the nation. And that has significant implications on us as we continue to contemplate the services that are going to be provided, the development for our labor and our workforce and what this means. And one of the things that we have a difficult time projecting, because you can't just take population growth and existing use rates and apply it and determine this is what your population. So I'm not so sure that I necessarily believe that we're going to be this much bigger by 2026, because one of the things that it doesn't take into consideration is, number one, healthcare reform, and it also doesn't take into consideration advances in treatment and technology and pharmaceuticals. We've seen a pretty significant and steady decline in utilization for open heart cases in western Montana over the past 10 years. And that's because we do a much better job managing heart disease through statins, healthier lifestyles, but we also have interventional cardiology that's thrown a significant curveball and that's had a significant. So there's going to continue to be technology and pharmaceuticals and hopefully changes in lifestyles that come about. And no telling what's going to happen with healthcare reform that are going to really start driving patients, continue to drive patients out of the hospital. In fact, we've done, at our current rate, a projection in our ambulatory services revenue, and I think I said this earlier, will eclipse our inpatient revenue by 2017 if everything stays consistent. So the information that Larry shared earlier does weigh very heavily when we start talking about how we continue to position ourselves for the future. Oh, I was afraid it was going to do that. There we go. I'm going to spend, how much time do I have? 5 minutes. Very, very short period of time talking about what we are really trying to do. And this is a busy slide, and I'll kind of interpret it for you here in just a second, as it relates to really the role that we see ourselves playing in western Montana. Because as I mentioned earlier, we have a 50-50 joint venture in a nursing home. We have a joint venture with Community Medical Center for home health, and we have a designated rural health clinics. We've got ambulatory sites across western Montana. And one of the things that we believe is broken about our current system is the fragmentation of care that's being delivered today. And you know, when the internal medicine physicians stop seeing their own inpatients, that's probably the most recent tangible progression in healthcare or regression in healthcare that highlights the nature of how fragmented care can be. And when you think about what happens, I mean, we're getting ready to get dinged from a financial perspective on readmission rates as a hospital. That means that once we discharge a patient, if the patient's readmitted within 30 days, we get hit for it financially. We're still trying to figure out what that hit is. Well, I don't run the nursing homes. I don't necessarily, we have a joint venture in one, but that's one. I don't necessarily run the home health clinics. And as we start contemplating where healthcare goes and they start realigning the incentives around how we get paid, you better believe it's going to start changing our disposition towards what happens post-discharge. And that is important. Post-discharge care is extremely important. Well, when we start contemplating what we want to accomplish as a service area, and I know this sounds lofty and I hope it doesn't come across as patronizing, but it is very sincere. We really do want to play and take a leadership role in transforming the way healthcare is delivered for western Montana. The current system is based primarily on volumes. The more we do, the better we get paid. I was at a forum about a year ago similar to this, and I was telling a story about the first time I took over as a CEO of a hospital and I found out we were giving flu shots. Now just put your business hat on for a second, bear with me. I found out, I said, flu shots? Why the hell are we giving flu shots? That's like a tavern owner having an AA meeting in their bar at happy hour. That doesn't make any sense. Well, it makes sense in the context that we're providers, but when you think about the economics of healthcare, the more patients I have in my hospital, the better I'm doing financially. Now, is that what we want out of the healthcare system as a society? No, it's not. We have got to revalue primary care without question. We've got to put an emphasis on primary care, and we have to put an emphasis on the managing of the health and wellness of the communities we're serving, rather than just taking care of the patients as they present themselves. We have many of the components of a comprehensive health system. And one of the things that we really want to do is actually start changing the way those components work together so that we can do a more effective job at managing the health and wellness of the communities we serve across the continuum of care. And that is something that really doesn't happen very effectively today, either here or really in many other settings in healthcare across the U.S. So with that, I had another slide in here that I'm not going to go over, and I think I'm getting the hook. At this time, am I supposed to allow for a couple of questions, or do a couple of questions? And I think we're going to have an opportunity for Q&A in the larger setting as well. So Before I turn it over to Steve, any questions? Yes.
What do you see the number one probably concern for you guys attracting new physicians and quality care professionals to Missoula? Is there one right now? Is it coming out of phase, coming down to growth in the area as far as housing? You know, is there anything really that struggle with you as the community doesn't apply to the hospital?
You know, I think again, I hope I'm not stepping anything politically, but we've been an active supporter of Five Valleys Land Trust, because Five Valleys, I think, really reflects and represents what it's trying to protect the things that attracted me here, attract a lot of the physicians. I mean, we've been very fortunate in the caliber and the quality and the quantity of physicians we've been able to attract, because we do have so many things to offer from a lifestyle perspective. And most of the physicians I work with, they come here because they know they can get good quality care for their patients, and they can also have a good lifestyle. The physician recruiting challenges, and Dr. Roberts certainly can speak to this better than I can, but Dr. Roberts himself is a casualty of the economics around internal medicine. Internal medicine are the physicians that are trained to take care of the 65-plus patient. And how many graduated that went into normal outpatient? It was less than 250 last year. 250 nationally. Right, you can't make a living in an independent practice setting, and what we're finding is that the hospitals are having to help subsidize those. And when I speak to really revaluing primary care, when you start thinking about that, the baby boomers moving into that age cohort where they're going to need this specific, the workforce isn't being developed to take care of those patients. And so what's going to happen is you're going to actually start seeing alternative models of care that aren't going to meet the expectations of the consumer, because they're not going to be seeing necessarily physicians. They may see a family practitioner, or they may see a mid-level like a PA or a nurse practitioner, and the expectation most of these patients have is that they're going to see a doctor when they walk into the clinic, and the physicians that go into internal medicine have naturally a preference or an interest in seeing geriatrics. And you get some of those with family practice, but typically people go into family practice because they want to see a broader range of physicians. So that's probably my most worrisome element right there, is how we're going to take care of the 65 plus as the training programs really aren't currently meeting the needs on that front. And I don't think that they will until the economics of that particular practice changes. Answer your question? That was a long-winded answer, wasn't it? Sorry. Us hospital administrators are known for that sometimes. Any other questions before I turn it over to Steve? All right, Steve.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Also want to thank the sponsors for today's event for putting this together. Want to express my appreciation to Larry, Colleen, and really pulling off a great morning. And want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us this morning. As Larry's pulling that up, and I think he's just about ready to go. Perfect, thank you. Like St. Pat's Community Medical Center is a nonprofit healthcare organization. We are not part of a system. We are based here in Missoula. You are the stockholders of Community Medical Center. You and every other resident of this community, and I would suggest of a good part of western Montana. Because like St. Pat's, about 50% of our patients come from Missoula County, and about 50% come along what we call the 93 corridor, running from Hamilton to the south to Ronan to our north. Community Medical Center also employs a number of physicians. We have 42 physicians employed today, predominantly primary care physicians in the areas of pediatrics and family practice. We do employ some specialists, but they're the exception for our group. Community really focuses on 4 core competencies. While we are a general acute care hospital, we recognize that we can't be all things to all people. And with that in mind, you will see the primary focus for us in the areas of rehabilitative medicine, pediatrics, women's services, and oncology. And so let me take you through a few slides and give you a little bit about where we came from, who we are, and our plans for the future. Community Medical Center was founded in 1910 by two physician brothers. The history is perhaps not unlike a lot of communities in the Northwest or the Midwest. Started as a privately owned hospital, and then those brothers turned it over to the community. The actual location where we are today started with a new tower in 1972, and then our rehab hospital was added in 1980. On our campus, we have a partnership with Advanced Imaging. That's a 50-50 partnership between Missoula Radiology and Community Medical Center. We also are partners with our surgeons and our anesthesiologists in Big Sky Surgical Center. Community Medical Center owns a 35% position in that outpatient surgery center. Our campus is about 43 acres today. Here's a picture of what we looked like in 1972. It was a little open back then. And not the best shot. I've got a little better one in here, but it gives you a sense of how the campus is developed today. I had noted that we have 4 core competencies, but certainly offer other services. Let me just touch on those quickly. I think we're well known for obstetrics, an area that will be kicking off a renovation and expansion project of about $20 million next year with obstetrics, GYN surgery. Pediatrics, our neonatal intensive care unit is the most active NICU in the state. We do treat what are called level 3 babies, and so this is really our tertiary service, if you will. And we see babies from throughout western Montana, but also central Montana as well that are transferred here. Our rehabilitation program includes both inpatient and outpatient, and one of the recognized strongest programs in the Northwest. Cardiology services and oncology, 2 core services that really are necessary for us to maintain a strong position as a good med-surg facility. General surgery, emergency medicine, not as active. I think Jeff was projecting about 33,000 visits in the coming years. Today we see about 20,000 visits, so it puts in sense the activity of the 2 ERs at the 2 hospitals. Our primary care physicians, diagnostic and laboratory services. This is our service area. It shows the primary, which is designated in the dark blue, that 93 corridor I mentioned, and then our secondary service area in the light blue. As we look for the future, the biggest project that we've been preparing for, some would say too long, is the development of a new women's services building. It's really a building that will be dedicated to obstetrics and a new NICU. This will be an expansion of about 16,000 square feet new, and then about 21,000 square feet remodeled is what we're currently planning. The project cost is estimated at about $20 million. Recently we opened our breast health center on campus, and this is really an opportunity to provide women with breast cancer or the diagnostic of that disease the opportunity for treatment to be coordinated and consolidated in one convenient location. Today we're doing about 1,600 deliveries per year. Having seen Larry's presentation again this morning, I'm glad we had the opportunity to work with him in projecting the demand rates for our women and newborn center. The actual capacity won't be much different than what we have today. Certainly the configuration will be different and much more patient sensitive. We will have some dedicated space for some of our ancillary support services, but the core services will be about the same, and that's because what you see on the projection shows that we'll see a small dip, but over the next 20 years, volumes in OB will remain relatively flat. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't take the opportunity to note that October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And so this is a picture of our new digital mammography screening that's occurring at Community Medical Center. Pediatrics is a second core service for us that I mentioned, and something that we are investing heavily in. We've developed a partnership with Seattle Children's Hospital. We really think that they are one of the premier children's providers, not only in the Northwest, but in this country. And it's an opportunity to work with them. They bring a number of specialists to us, and you see those specialties listed here. We have providers coming to our campus, many of them on a monthly basis. We recently remodeled our pediatric unit. That was about a $750,000 investment for us. Here's a picture of just down the hallway. A third core competency for us, one that we focus on, is rehabilitative medicine. To give you a sense of scope, 12 of the 14 brain injury specialists in the field of rehabilitative medicine who work in the state of Montana are based at Community Medical Center. We've received high patient satisfaction scores. 88% of our patients discharged from CMC are released and actually can go home. Community Physician Group, as I mentioned, is a group primarily made up of primary care physicians, 42 providers, and the specialties that are covered are listed there. As I said, most of our practitioners are in the fields of primary care and family practice OB, internal medicine, or pediatrics. Oncology is a relatively new service that we've expanded for our campus. We've been providing oncology for many years, having had an oncologist based on our campus, but we believe, as Jeff showed earlier, that with the demographics, that this is a critical service that will need to be expanded. And we've done that through a partnership in working with Montana cancer specialists who have been in this community for many years, who have developed clinics in Hamilton and Polson, now have developed a clinic with us on Community Medical Center's campus. And so today, it's our estimate that about 1 in 3 chemotherapy patients receiving care in Missoula County are now receiving that at Community Medical Center. This is a picture of our new oncology center that was renovated and opened up a little less than a year ago. Here's a picture of the campus today and a little discussion about where we are today. On the economic side, we employ full or part-time about 1,200 employees. That equates to about 900 full-time equivalents or FTEs. Our gross revenues are about $200 million. Our net operating revenue is about $125 million. Annual employee salaries, a little over $50 million. And our community benefit, and Jeff talked a little bit about this before, but going through the calculation used by the Catholic Hospital Association, which Providence is a member of, and the Voluntary Hospitals of America, which both of our hospitals are members of, calculates that our community benefit at Community Medical Center is approximately $18 million. I've referenced some of these partnerships, but just want to touch on them again and give you a sense of how we believe it's very important to be working with our medical community in the development and delivery of healthcare services. And so CMC is working with the radiologists in the community on advanced imaging, with surgeons and anesthesiologists on Big Sky Surgical Center, with Montana cancer specialists in the field of oncology. We work with the Billings Clinic in the development of GYN surgical oncology. The only GYN surgical oncology service available in western Montana today is available at Community, where one of the practitioners from the Billings Clinic comes to our facility once a month to see patients and actually provide surgical services. With Seattle Children's in the development of pediatric surgery, and we're pleased to announce, if you didn't see in the paper last week, that Dr. Ann Mankdalo, a board-certified pediatric surgeon who worked in our community previously, returned to Missoula. She returns as an employee of Seattle Children's, and Seattle Children's is basing her here, and through our partnership, we're supporting that investment economically and making it possible for that service to again be available in our community. And then working with a number of providers, both Seattle Children's and others on the pediatric specialty clinic. In the area of collaboration, something that Jeff and I have talked about that we think is very critical to really building the medical Missoula concept, if you will, is assuring that we have a robust interface between our future electronic medical records. Both hospitals are in the process today of building their EMRs, or electronic medical records, and we believe it's essential that that information be interfaced, and that providers from outside the community wanting to access information can do that in a convenient way and access information that exists at either hospital's database. So building that bridge is something that Jeff and I have been talking about for the past year, and our IT leadership is working on. We recently worked on the tobacco-free initiative with St. Pat's, St. Joseph's Hospital, and Tamarack in the Western Montana Clinic, and last week kicked off our no smoking zones at both facilities. And I think it's important, and Jeff touched on this, and I want to as well, I think it's very important in the way that the hospitals have worked together over a number of years, in each focusing in a distinct tertiary care service. For Community Medical Center, it's really the neonatal intensive care services and offering that service to high-risk babies. For St. Pat's, it's open heart surgery. And what Jeff and I do agree on is that these services require a base volume, a volume that if both hospitals were offering these services likely couldn't be attained. And I think we both agree that duplication would likely result in a degradation of the quality of care, and that's not in the interest of this community or the patients that we serve. And for that reason, you see us working hard for us to continue to maintain our unique focus and in those areas avoid duplication and overlap. Jeff mentioned that in a few years that he thinks he'll see 50% of his revenue coming from outpatient. For Community Medical Center, that exists today. Could you grab me the water, Jeff? Today, 50% of our revenue comes from outpatient services. We see a need to really look at investments in this area. In areas that we will see significant investments going forward will be in the area of imaging and endoscopy. Certainly for us to maintain a strong hub, a strong Missoula market for medical care will require collaboration, but it's also a recognition that competition will exist, and we hope to keep that competition occurring in a way that is positive, that really drives both hospitals towards excellence in providing the best quality care that we can. And that's a overview of Community Medical Center. I'm also happy to answer a question or two before we get into the general discussion. If not, then thank you.
Thank you guys both very much. I think that they shared a little bit about what their organization has to offer to our communities and some of the challenges that they're facing with. So I'd like to turn it back to table discussion one more time, and I'd like this time for you to talk about Missoula as a community as it relates to our healthcare environment and what we need to be doing as a community to try to help facilitate and feed into and help with the strategies that these two gentlemen just put forward for their organizations. So if we could have about 5-minute conversation at your table, then we'll start pulling some questions up. And I will call on a couple of tables to share your conversation. So discuss, and I'll come out and select a couple of tables. Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and finish up our table conversations. There's always a delay on the microphones. We'll go ahead and get started with a couple of individuals that I don't know if they said they'd be willing to share or if I selected them to share. We never quite know how that goes. So
Check.
let's start with this group over here. If you would just share a little bit about what your table was discussing and if there's some specific questions, if you'd put those forward.
Good morning. What our table was discussing basically is how, primarily through University of Montana College of Technology and with the job services, how we can provide what is needed, services, people, training, skills to the Missoula community. One thing that we think that we need to do and have to do, although we do to a great extent right now, but we have to do more, especially looking into the future, is work with St. Pat's and work with Community Medical Center to see exactly what they need, how they need, what skills they are looking for, what training they're going to require. Two things that actually what we spoke about, which stuck out at our table at least, was this record keeping. I believe it was mentioned by one of the speakers, electronic data keeping. We really need to look more into that. If that is what is needed, we need to get people the skills that are needed with there, perhaps a bigger or a larger area that would include that would be health information informatics, perhaps that whole area, and that is a subset of part of what was discussed today. Also, what we noticed, at least from our table, from the whole discussions today, was that we're going to be seeing a great increase, if you will, in the number of people in the baby boomers, of people who are going to be 65 years of age and older, and everything that goes along with that, with health care. And what we need to do, once again, is to collaborate with and get with these area providers and really start flushing out, what does that mean? What does that mean that there's going to be all these people 65 years of age and older, and are there going to be a need for people with certain skills, whatever that is, such as certain healthcare technicians, for lack of a better term there, that are directly going to be responsible and have the skills to care for, okay, whether in a primary or secondary situation with people that are above 65. So just to sum up, what we need to do just is we need to collaborate with the healthcare providers very, very closely and start ascertaining what skills they need, what training people need, what programs that you're looking for that we can help provide.
Thank you very much. Steve, could you speak just very briefly to the question in regards to the electronic record keeping and some of the skills that are necessary for that, and then I'll have you pass the microphone over to Jeff, and if you wouldn't mind speaking just a little bit to the collaboration efforts with the community and how you guys see that moving forward.
You know, an area that concerns me as a hospital administrator in introducing the electronic medical record is that I worry about having the internal bench strength to be able to do that. And a lot of that, I think, boils down to a bit of a make-buy decision for us, in the sense that we are in discussions with the Billings Clinic about working with them in a collaborative way in which they will provide some backup services in the IT sector relative to helping us implement and then maintain that electronic medical record for our practitioners, for our organization. And we have to do that simply because we don't have that resource and we can't afford to maintain that resource as a small independent hospital. And so building that collaboration is really critical. Now, I think general training for all of our clinicians in regards to strong IT skills and how to use that in the future will be very critical. That's something we're having to train our older workforce on today. And it's essential that our workforce coming out in the future have that to begin with.
Randy, you mentioned earlier, you asked a question about some of the challenges that we have in terms of recruiting. Some of the things that we're actually finding out as the physicians coming right out of training, if you don't have an electronic medical record in place, they scratch you off the list. Because they've worked in an environment where they have one, they see the significant benefits to the patient and to their own practice. And so there is a transition that we're going to have to make in Western Montana. And I can tell you that, from a philosophical standpoint, I mean, it's one of the things that's frustrating about working in the healthcare industry is we're such late adopters to technology. We got great technology. We got robots doing surgery on people using robots to do surgery on people. But I should qualify that, making sure you understand what I'm saying there. But you think about, we're getting ready to implement this bedside medication verification where it's a patient safety initiative where you barcode the drug, barcode the patient's wristband. And you scan both before the drug is administered to make sure it's the right patient, the right dose, yada, yada, yada. This is 2009. I remember in 1978 going to the grocery store with my mom, and they were using lasers and barcodes to scan groceries. It's 1970 grocery store technology that we're just now applying into the healthcare. And when we start talking about the medical record itself, it's still it's a lot of handwritten notes, it's paper, and when we really think about what a healthcare system should look like, and it enhances, not just it improves the cost of care, but enhances the quality of care, is that the clinical information follows the patient to the most appropriate setting. And it gets into the hands of the providers at the right time. The Western Montana Clinic really got out in front in Western Montana with the deployment of an electronic medical record. We've been trying to work with them in terms of figuring out how that's going to interface with our hospital information system. The information, and Steve and I collectively agree on the philosophy around this, that it absolutely, we need to have, there are markets where the hospitals have used this as a competitive advantage. They've rolled out electronic medical records to other referral sources, and keeping that information inside a network can actually serve to steer patients. We collectively don't feel like that's in the best interest of our community, and that it should be an open architecture where information flows freely regardless of where the patients are sent or regardless of where the patients are going. It's a tremendous capital investment. It's a tremendous investment in training and technology and in personnel, but it's something that we philosophically agree that has to happen if we're truly going to make a difference in the way healthcare is delivered for Western Montana.
Thank you very much.
I'm Linda McCarthy with the Missoula Downtown Association, and your topic of discussion is pretty interesting. We had a critical care child that we had to take to a number of different locations. We ended up having to keep our own medical records in three-ring binders, and we were flying all over the country sharing those records with other people because there was no comprehensive way for us to maintain those records. So you're right, we have a problem there. Our table talked a lot about how we can contribute to the success of our hospitals here in the area, and one of you touched on the quality of life and recruitment efforts. I think we as membership organizations, as business organizations, continue to be the stewards of the quality of life in our community. So to keep that as our responsibility and continue to improve the area, the events, the activities, the amenities that we have is going to be helpful for you in your recruitment efforts. We talked here about education and training, about workforce development. We say workforce development all the time, but that is such a broad term for what we mean. We talked, Barry, about the College of Technology, and maybe as a community we need to find a way to build that new facility so you can expand your services rather than waiting for the state legislature to give us the opportunity or the tools to build those types of facilities. We talked about supporting things like the Ronald McDonald House, the St. Patrick's House, and the foundations. As a community, if we support those areas, that contributes to the care that they can provide and the community support that is so important to both institutions. We talked about retaining and recruiting those folks in their 20s and 30s, you know, in reference to Larry's presentation about their contributions to the economy and to our schools and to the things that we value. We've heard about people wanting to retire to communities where there were universities and arts and cultural amenities and good quality health care. If we continue to focus our efforts on that, you know, 20 and 30-year-old individual, I think that improves our quality of life as a whole. And then, of course, we talked a little bit about choosing local providers first. If you have an opportunity to utilize those services in our community in Missoula, it contributes to the economic well-being of our community as opposed to seeking services elsewhere. Sometimes we don't have a choice in that area, but certainly through my adulthood, I have seen both service providers really expand the types of services that they can provide. The partnership with Seattle Children's Hospital is a very good example of that. So thank you very much.
All right, and a lot of conversation in regards to the community benefit. Both of you spoke to the community benefit beforehand. Would each one of you just touch base very briefly on what you anticipate the shift in community benefit in the future? I'm sure that when you were speaking, Steve, about the calculation that is utilized, just as everything else is shifting as we're talking about here today, that delivery of community benefit will certainly be shifting as well. Can both of you speak to what you anticipate that shift to be and how your organizations might be prepared to respond to that shift?
I want to make sure I understand the question. Because when we talk about community benefit, when I hear the word community benefit, it's very specific in the terms of how we calculate it. I mean, if you talk to me about trends in community benefit, I would tell you that the trend that we're anticipating seeing is a significant growth in charity care. We're seeing a significant growth in bad debts with increases in coinsurance and deductibles. We're having a more difficult time collecting those at time of service. And depending upon what happens with payment reform as it relates to the health care reform debate, if we continue to get cuts, how are we going to operate our institutions with a growing section of our business, a significant, but it's 54% Medicare at St. Pat's, where a lot of times the services aren't even covering the cost, the payments aren't even covering the cost of services. So that dynamic has continued to evolve, and I can tell you that the growth rate that we've seen at St. Pat's, over $3 million growth per year, is unsustainable. And so we're going to have to do something, and I don't know what that something is, but the only thing that's controllable are the elective services. And so what's endangered if the government-sponsored health care continues to grow and charity care continues to grow, the elective services can sometimes be put in harm's way.
It's an interesting question and kind of the macroeconomics of healthcare for a hospital. If you look at the average hospital, I'm not speaking for either hospital right now, but just the average hospital in the U.S. today, 60% of the hospitals are losing money. A healthy margin for a nonprofit hospital is somewhere between 3 and 5%, more towards 5 if you're in aggressive capitalization. With 60% of them losing money, it's a very difficult economic proposition. Healthcare reform is talking about significantly reducing bad debt and charity by providing more coverage for patients. But the reality is that one of the things that the hospital industry has agreed to is a cut of about $155 billion in future increases to pay for, or our add, if you will, to that $900 billion cost of healthcare reform. So that the net cost, even though we're getting more patients covered through the cut, is about a break even. As we see more patients covered, how will we fulfill that charity care mission that we have? Today, both hospitals, I would guess, are at about 4 to 5 to 1 on the tax, theoretical tax accountability we would have if we were a for-profit hospital. My guess is that will remain about the same as we shift in other ways of meeting that obligation.
Thank you. That's exactly where we were going with it. When you talk about the member organizations and a lot of the organizations that are sponsoring these events, their responsibility to the community is to try to build the social network within our community as well. And it seems like there's a direct correlation between what your challenge is and what our responsibility is as a community. So it's nice to hear that you're recognizing and that we're trying to find ways to work between those two.
We talked a little bit about primary cares and how they impact healthcare delivery. Could you talk a little bit about how the decreasing number of physicians that go into primary care is going to impact healthcare over the next 5 to 10 years?
Eric, I thought we agreed easy questions. It's a great question, and you know, there's others like Dr. Roberts, I think, that can provide a better answer than I, but from my sense, I think we're going to have to look at using a lot more mid-levels and how we provide primary care medicine, and we're seeing that already today. The advancement of nurse practitioners and physician assistants. I think built into a primary care base, overseen appropriately by trained physicians, can be a very effective way of delivering primary care. So I guess that's one critical change I'd throw out.
I also think that you're going to see some changes in the care delivery model. You're going to see, just like Steve said, you're going to see probably some mid-levels coupled with internal medicine physicians or primary care physicians, but you're also going to see for high-risk patient populations, whether they're in chronic disease or frail elderly, you're going to see the establishment of what we're calling a medical home or a center for coordinated patient care. And we have a program, we have 2 PACE programs, or programs for the all-inclusive care of the elderly in Seattle and Portland, that we're looking at the potential of deploying here in western Montana. And the annual readmission rate for a patient that has Medicare that's admitted to a hospital, 20% of them get readmitted within 30 days. The readmission rate for these patients that are being managed in this particular clinic is right around 5%. It significantly changes the way that care is being delivered for these patients. It's multidisciplinary, it's comprehensive, and the providers know the patient. And I think that if we're really going to get a handle, especially when we talk about the 65 plus, if we don't change the care delivery model where we're actually going out and seeking the patient and knowing the patient more intimately than we know him today, we're not going to fundamentally, we're going to fall far short in terms of our societal expectations of the care that's going to be delivered to those patients.
And then the last table.
Kim Luttrell, I'm the President CEO of the Missoula Chamber of Commerce. Our table was primarily made up of my staff, like 70%, and with the past chairman of my board and a past chair of one of my committees, I'd say we were about 100% Chamber of Commerce, so this has a little slant to it. But it was a good conversation. We did talk about workforce and the need for us as a community to step up. I feel the Chamber's trying to do their role. We have a Business Affairs Committee, thanks to some work from Tom Gorman and Wolf, that we're working to bridge some of those needs in this community. But I do believe that is an area, like a lot of you have said, all of us need to work together to figure out ways to work closer with our educational system and the business and bridging that. We also talked about the need for this community and all our organizations to step forward and try to share everything that Missoula has to offer. And main goal, and this is something that I spoke to both Steve and Jeff about, I believe if we can educate ourselves as a community, as a business community, when we're making decisions on health care for our loved ones. The example I gave is my mom lives in Lewistown, Montana, and she was going to go have her heart surgery done in Billings. So I said, well, Mom, if you do that, that's 2 weeks off from work. I got to go sit in Billings, but if you come to Missoula with leading heart care here, you can be here. The family can come stay with me. It saves money. So I thought if we could do that all across all the sectors and educate ourselves about bringing some of our loved ones here and some of the people we care about, that might be another niche that we can grow the market share even further than what it is today. We talked about competition, and that competition is good. That if you go to one ER and you don't have a good experience, you can try out the other one. So there was some good and some cost savings there. So there was discussion about there. But there was also compliments on the cooperation between the 2 hospitals and how much it means and appreciated from this community in working together. So there was great discussion, and thank you for today.
All right, thank you, Kim. We're going to open it up now for general questions. If anyone has a specific question that they'd like to share for any of the panelists.
Well, I'm sort of the ringer in the audience because these guys know me pretty well, but I'm Tom Roberts. I'm a doctor and president of the Western Montana Clinic. We've sort of had good news and bad news today. I mean, the good news is that the healthcare sector is expanding in Missoula, and the bad news is that the healthcare sector is expanding in Missoula. The topic around our table was, how much money are we spending as companies or as people that are insuring our employees on health care. And certainly as we see the rise in expense in both hospitals and, in my clinic, more money coming through every year, that gets translated into higher insurance premiums, which, as we all know, affects not only competition, but ability of companies to provide insurance, higher debt for you guys. There's got to be an end here. And I have some thoughts, which I'm not going to share, but I'd be interested in yours. When do we change? When do we change the dynamic here? Instead of how do we make more money going through the hospitals, how do we keep spending more money on health care? When does that dynamic change into how do we maintain health for our community and for our state, and do that in a way that makes sense economically so that we can all afford health care in the future?
Wow. Well, therein lies a significant portion of the topic of debate on healthcare reform, and we could spend the rest of the day talking about it, but you and I have shared on a number of occasions kind of our overall philosophy about that, and certainly some of the things that we're advocating for on that front, I think, get at that. And I alluded to it earlier, and that really is, you got, and from my perspective, you got two major topics that are being debated at the national level around reform, and one is around access and coverage, and the other one is around how we pay for health care. And within both of those, you can fold into both of those broad topics the whole concept of insurance reform and portability around insurance, around universal coverage or not universal coverage. But getting at that particular point, I think that it gets to the way we pay for health care. And fundamentally, human nature in a capitalistic society, behavior follows the dollar. And that's a brash and unfortunate statement about human nature, but it is what it is. And if you look at how practices and hospitals have developed, it's because of the way the economics and what we're paid for. And I think that if you fundamentally change the way we're paid, and you pay the provider community to do exactly what you talked about, is revalue primary care, and because primary care has to be at the center of managing the wellness of the patient population that they serve, and we have to create dynamics like the medical home, the PACE program, where the providers actually have an opportunity, an economic opportunity to really get to know the patients and take care of the patients differently than they're taken care of today. If we don't do those fundamental things at a core level, we're not going to change the current course in terms of the economics of healthcare and what it's costing us as a society.
I guess the quick is I agree. I think at community medical centers, something that we are very committed to is building our organization really around primary care and wanting to partner with our primary care physicians in a way that really redefines the business model. Because I agree with Jeff. I think that if you walk into hospitals, those areas that are nice and shiny are the things that drove our economics in the past and drive them today. But if we want to control healthcare costs, if we want it affordable for our society, we've got to move away from procedural orientation. We've got to move to cognitive management of the patient, prospectively reducing the risk of needing to do something as opposed to being rewarded to do more. And there's a plus and a minus to that. The plus is that hopefully we'll, as our president likes to say, bend the curve and lower the future costs of inflation. The minus is that we will become less of an economic engine for this community. And the balance is trying to find both. I think we've got to drive a new delivery model. It's got to be built around primary care. It's got to be built around prospective management of keeping people healthy and not responding retrospectively when they're only ill. And if we do that well, hopefully we as a society can afford health care coverage for all in a way that's meaningful. And I'll stop my philosophy there.
Just to say one thing on that, we're going to bend the curve on the cost of health care, but I really think Missoula is still going to become a a much larger provider of health care as we go forward. It's just there's just certain places that are emerging where this is going to be. And so even as we bend the curve on the cost of health care, Missoula itself will participate in that, but you're going to see an expanding health care sector here in the community. So.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
This has been really good, guys.
This could be for Larry Swanson, or Jeff and Steve could chime in too. Within the healthcare industry, did you find in any of your data that there were different sectors that suffered more or suffered less through this economic time?
Yeah, when you look at the numbers, you've got some parts of our economy that are growing and growing rapidly. You've got some parts that are growing slowly. You've got some parts that aren't growing at all, and then you've got other parts that are declining. But when you're looking at, well, how is our place faring as these overall changes occur in the economy, we're doing okay. So Missoula, in that sort of interplay of change within the economy, we've really emerged as, because of where we are and the type of community we are, having the university here I think is a big deal. I'd like to get both Jeff and Steve to tell us how they sell Missoula when they try to bring some of this scarce talent into a place like Missoula when it can go anywhere. I know back where I'm originally from Lincoln, Nebraska, and I know when you talk with the healthcare providers there, they lose some key specialist. It could take 2 years sometimes just to replace that person. So this is a competition, and it's a competition in which this entire community is participating in it. It comes to bear on people like this, but how do we sell this place?
I'm going to answer your question, then I'm going to jump into his. From our perspective, where we felt it as a hospital, is we felt it in the elective procedures. People were putting off elective cases left and right, primarily for a variety of reasons. Number one, they didn't want to come out of pocket, and number two, they didn't want to be gone from work because they felt like when they come back, maybe they didn't have a job. And so we did see across the state a pretty significant decline in elective procedures, and unfortunately, in the economics of healthcare, that's where a lot of the profit into hospitals comes. So we were particularly hit in that area. As it relates to how we sell Missoula, a lot of cases, depending upon the screening on the front end, it sells itself. You get people, I can certainly say in the International Heart Institute, we're turning down cardiologists that want to come to Missoula because of the reputation of the IHI and because of the amenities that this community has to offer. But in the tougher to recruit settings, it really is selling the quality of care that we can provide. It's selling the quality of lifestyle and the work balance that we have here, which is very unique compared to most communities across the U.S. And in certain situations, it's about what economic model is in place to support some of these specialists. I can tell you that we would not be able to retain an open heart program in this community if we did not have an employment relationship or some type of economic support relationship for those specialists. Because the economics, they can go somewhere else. They could still go somewhere else. They go to Seattle and make considerably more money. You just got to close that gap between the lifestyle demands and the economic expectations that they have. And that's where the hospitals come into play from time to time in having to actually provide an economic package that they may not be able to achieve in independent practice.
We too saw it, and probably a little more severely than St. Pat's on the elective side, because ours is based less on the trauma, less on the high-end tertiary services, more on primary care and OB and pediatrics. What do we sell relative to Missoula? Missoula really sells itself quite easily from my perspective. Never been an issue for us as we've met with candidates. The biggest issue I see is candidates' unwillingness to move because of the housing market. Everybody's sitting on a house somewhere that's down 30% and wanting to make that back before they make the move, and I don't have a fix for that one.
Just a quick follow-on. If we're going to see a big increase in the mid-level skills folks, as a part of this bending the cost curve. Where are we going to get the mid-level skills people? Where do we get them now, and where are we going to get them in the future?
Good question. And I'm not, I hope Jeff can speak to it a little better than I on the supply, demand, and mid-levels. I don't have that, that knowledge base today. You know, many of them are coming out of the nursing ranks, going back, getting their master's degree and becoming a nurse practitioner, being able to act independently as a mid-level. Physician assistants don't require that nursing, but also a similar training in their preparation. Be a good question.
I don't know that I have the answer to the question either, and Tom, maybe you can jump in, but I think from our perspective, it's not as, from what I'm seeing today, it's not necessarily an issue around supply as much as it is around how we as a state credential and what we allow those providers to do, and it's how we pair those providers with the physician community and create care settings to where it makes sense from the both providers' perspective. Right now, I can tell you, you know, in talking with some of the physicians at St. Pat's right now within the Western Montana Clinic and trying to create some alternative, it's not necessarily sometimes in their economic best interest to have to be paired with a mid-level because of the dynamics of that particular practice setting. So I think from a regulatory setting, we have to define as a state what we're going to allow these people to do, and then creating the economic model for them to pair up with the appropriate providers to that makes sense for the care that we're trying to achieve.
I'd like to weigh in on Dr. Roberts' comment about where this ends. That's my question too, as a business owner. Where does this cost end? And what I see in terms of what's going on in reform right now, frankly, I don't think is reform at all. I think it's just more of the same stuff, just another 1,000 pages of it. And so I think what the answer to it is getting back to individual personal accountability. We as a society need to drive personal accountability into people's behavior, their lifestyles, to all the way down to their healthcare choices. And we have to give them an incentive to do that. And I think there's a way of doing that. For sure, but until we get that right down to the ground level where every individual citizen has skin in the game in this healthcare issue, we're not going to resolve it at all. These costs are just going to continue to escalate and go out of control. But when they get skin in the game, they're making decisions. They know every decision affects them. Now we're going to get some control. Now we're going to make wise choices and in terms of behavior, lifestyle behavior, and in terms of healthcare consumption. And I think there's a way of doing that, but I never see it debated. But we right now, I think it's sort of like the health savings account, I think is a great start that direction. Now that's money that they have that they decide how it's going to get spent. And there's a lot more money that we put into all kinds of these entitlement programs that we have all the way from workers' compensation to our health care to even our 401ks, unemployment, all these kind of benefits that if those people had that more in their control and they knew that was theirs, we'd have a lot less people that are saying, I don't think Social Security is going to be there when I get there, so why worry about it? You know, and we've got people that are just making those kinds of choices. So I don't know how we can drive that, but we need to somehow, and maybe you guys can give some input, how do we drive that personal accountability and behavior into the individual?
Who wants to touch that one? I, on a personal level, don't disagree with anything that you're saying. And jokingly, we were at the table talking about in the current economic state. Again, put your business hat on. Kim Luttrell invited us and said, "What can we do as a chamber to help support the hospitals?" And you know, rationally speaking, if you're thinking about this logically from a business perspective, eat more fried chicken and smoke more cigarettes, and we'll do great. But ultimately, that's not what we as a society want. And so, you know, without getting into a political discussion around personal accountability, I can certainly tell you, if you look at use rates, and that's the number of people admitted per 1,000, you look at Western Montana, we're running right around 92. So 92 people out of every 1,000 we have experiences an inpatient admission on an annual basis. You go to where I came from in the South, it's 135. And why is that? It's lifestyle. You go to the Northeast, it's lifestyle and access to primary care. So lifestyle and lifestyle choices absolutely plays in, and I don't necessarily know that I have a good answer or how you integrate that into the reform debate, but I do think that the individual choices that we make do impact the care of all. And there is a crass saying in the hospital industry, and it's true, that shift happens. Cost is shifted to those that pay. And whether when we get a cut from Medicare or a cut from Medicaid, when somebody comes in and has tremendously expensive care because of poor lifestyle choices that they made, we as a society pay for that today.
It's a very complex issue. Having been in this now about 23 years, and it frustrates me that I don't have a nice, succinct answer I can give you and say, if we do A, B, C, and D, then it's all going to be fixed. A couple of thoughts. If there was a article that the Congressional Budget Office put out about a year ago looking at what drives the cost of health care, malpractice. As a cost, insurance, 1 or 2%. As defensive medicine, maybe 10 to 12%. Aging, yeah, it's a piece, but it's a smaller piece. I think it was in single digits. 40 to 50% of the cost, I recall, was driven by technology. New advances in the pharmaceutical industry, new advances in the medical device industry, they bring to us things we value. Patients today in their 90s, I would guess, are getting surgery at St. Pat's and are getting hips at both facilities. Patients that 10, 20 years ago never would have been treated, today are treated. And so it's our demand that is fueling that. It's frustrating to see the medical device industry and the pharmaceutical industry make most of their profit off of the U.S., not off of other countries. Seems that the interest there is getting the proof of the product to market and then going to the U.S. and really making your margin. Doesn't seem fair to me. We need to decide whether healthcare is a fundamental right. The difficulty, I don't disagree with you that we need to make people more accountable for their decisions. But I can also tell you honestly that it's very difficult to be calm and rational when it's your loved one in that bed. And how we make those decisions and whether we're willing to make cutbacks in the way that we buy cars or wash machines. I just don't think it works that way. So some combination of some type of governmental structure that defines a base service for us, some system that brings in self-accountability, which is a critical component of this, to me seems to be more the logical answer to this. The things that I have seen in Senator Baucus's plan, and there's much to debate, I have to honestly give him credit and applaud a lot of the things that he's trying to do. Things on the margin, I would agree, but things that collectively I hope can, it's not going to fundamentally change the cost of health care, but slow down the inflationary cost and provide better coverage for us. And so I am encouraged by what I see there.
Thank you very much. And I think we're going to go to our final question.
In Larry's presentation, Larry, you mentioned the term economic cluster in healthcare. We also heard the term medical hub or medical Missoula floating around. I guess my question is, beyond the hospitals, what part of the healthcare related industry does Missoula not currently have, in your view, that we should be looking at attracting in order to establish ourselves as a medical hub?
Notice he didn't want to touch this one. You know, I don't know the answer to that question, and so I hope I'm not going off on a tangent, and I'm going to answer a question that at a higher level, and that is what, and I think it'll get to your question. Kim asked the question when we met with her at the Chamber, what can the Chamber do to better support the healthcare industry? The honest answer to that question is to get behind responsible and rational and reasonable economic development. And when you start looking at the sectors of our community that we have to sell, when you start looking outside of just the hospitals, the intellectual capital that this town has to offer in the healthcare, in the medical sector, whether it's research at the university, biosciences, elsewhere within the community, I think that's an area where we should be able to capitalize on and grow. Outside of the hospitals, I mean, within the hospitals, we continue to look at services and what can we continue to keep, just like the critical access hospitals, what can we keep more better locally by providing better care and recruiting different specialists. Outside of the hospitals as a whole, it really is building upon the existing infrastructure that we have today from an economic development standpoint and grow that sector. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
All right. Let's go ahead and hear it for these folks and all the information that they brought forward today. Steve, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it. Jeff, thank you. Larry, thank you very much. We also want to thank our sponsors once again, First Security Bank, the Missoulian, and of course the Hilton Garden Inn for their fine hospitality. If you have any questions or if you have any additional topics that you'd like the task force to consider for the next business forum, you are welcome to go ahead and communicate that to any of the organizations that are putting forth the effort to go ahead and put these forums together for you and on your behalf. Larry, did you have something you want to add?
We'll put these PowerPoints, all three of them, up and link them to the various business sponsors' sites. Would that be yours, Barb, and what else?
Oh, we can coordinate that.
Okay, so anybody that wants to look at these PowerPoints, just go to the Missoula Convention and Visitors Bureau, and you'll have a link to it.
All right, you guys, thank you so much. Go off and have a great day. Enjoy your time here in Missoula and enjoy your family and your health. Thank you very much.